Hello, people. How's everyone doing? You know who it is.
That's good, John.
And it's fantastic. Hey, I was gonna introduce you on the sneak. You've already. It's good to have you, man. I was about to say, guys, because I don't even know if you know, Camgiverse, but when I actually advertised this, I didn't put a name down. I just said mystery guest. I don't know if you noticed that or not. So I was about to do a grand introduction, but hey, he's introduced himself. I am joined today with someone who we have just discussing that we probably should have done this link up a little while ago, and we hadn't. Well, I think we're both very busy doing content, whatever. But I think this topic has been a really nice little opportunity for us to unify on a topic that I think we've got a very similar outlook on. And it was a pleasure really to kind of like have a really someone who I regard as a very high level researcher, someone who takes their work incredibly seriously, and someone who's done an excellent job, I would say, on this subject so far. I enjoy his content. I've been subscribed to him for as long as I've known his channels existed, and we've had discourse back and forth before. But those of you who do or do not know, the guy who Macy has very kindly said needs no introduction, I would like to introduce to the King's Monologue for the first time, our brother Camgiverse.
Hey, that's what's up. That's what's up. Yeah, I'm happy to be here to have this conversation. This has been, I would say a nuclear bomb article in terms of the level of propaganda and anti-Black, scientific racism. So we're going to go in depth and just deconstruct the lies and just make genetics as a field, understanding its flaws, more accessible, to the greater Black population. That's our goal here.
That's great. I mean, I love to hear that. The honest truth is, we have no shared agenda in this, in that I think Camgiverse made a proposal, like in terms of making the field of genetics a bit more accessible and showing you some stuff. And I guarantee you a lot of the stuff he's got to show you, I have no idea what he's got to pull out. I'm just excited to see what he has and where this discussion goes. And I myself have a different, well, not a different perspective. I would say my perspective is a lot more simpler, in that you guys know me already when it comes to this field of genetics. And I am just a massive skeptic. I think the entire field is overhyped. I think people don't realize what a young discipline it is. And I also think that at the moment, it's a poison chalice, in that it's been corrupted from the ground up. And you're going to see, but the great thing is, me waffling along, but the great thing is this study, I think, like Camgiverse said, has been a wonderful opportunity for me to really kind of like take my gloves off. Because I'm not done with this Nuerat man study, by the way. I know I dropped a new video today. Put a 1 in the chat if you've seen the new video I dropped today. But I'm not done. I'm just getting started with this topic, because they've exposed themselves with this one. Even, like I said, in the video, the title of the video, I said they played themselves, and that's how I feel strongly about this. So, yeah, there you go, man. Kamji, over to you, my brother. You gone on mute? You still there?
Oh, my bad. Okay. Yeah, I really appreciate your reconstructions, because you're the only one like taking the meticulous effort to basically expose some of the frauds like Wilkerson and some of the claims that these guys like Irish make, and just removing the mask from what is it like you've shown that the emperor has no clothes when it comes to these reconstructions. Because when I look at your data, it's so clear that these are African populations, and just to see the bias of using modern samples and modern Egyptian populations or modern North Africans to reconstruct Neolithic and Paleolithic people, like just off the bat, even if I knew nothing about reconstruction, it just seems like BS. It just seems like a fraud. So I appreciate your work in that regard, helping us visualize what our ancestors definitely looked like.
And I appreciate that appreciation. And it feels like it's going to feel like I'm having a bit of a Macy fest here, but she said that I've got to put on the screen, yeah. And she said it's sad that YouTubers have more professional integrity than the establishment. Now, you guys don't know, before I just open up this live stream chat, the last kind of words that me and Camgiverse exchanged were in regards to the peer review that has been done about this study, and the fact that many people, kind of like professionals, academics in the field, have criticized the process that's been taken. And in many ways, I kind of concur with what Macy says here, in that there's critique, but in my view, what happens in the field of academics is that I feel like people get fatigued with the BS. And so the critique never goes far enough, particularly in this field. So I want Camgiverse, if you can, actually, I'm kind of maybe catching you off guard. You probably got some stuff that you wanted to do, so feel free to reject this request. But you've been having a look at some of the critiques that have come from the peer reviewers.
Yeah.
Is that something that you'd be happy to just kind of like go through with the guys on the channel now? Some of the critiques, maybe share them on the screen or something.
Yeah. I could bring up the Nature article because I don't actually have it up right now, but I could see if I could find it.
I'll give you time, don't feel any pressure.
For sure.
Okay, yeah, so I know that's probably spinning you off. You probably had something else that you wanted to do, but it would be a nice place to
it's cool.
Okay,
I could easily get into it.
Good. Yeah, because I think it would be a nice place to start, because I'm with Macy here. I just feel like there's critiques that are raised, but I don't feel like the critiques necessarily go far enough. And I don't think that's people perhaps in the field of academics lacking integrity. What I actually feel, it's more like, I feel like people do get fatigued and they get used to some of this stuff, and they get used to having to debunk this stuff from that kind of like that plane of academia, where you kind of have to accept that there's been a level of professional integrity entering it. And I think where we're more fortunate, being YouTubers, so to speak, or independent researchers, is that we don't have to show them any respect. You know, I don't have to go into one of Karen Wilkinson's reconstructions and then be like, oh, well, you know, this is I can just look at it and go, are you having a laugh? You know, that's my liberty. I'm independent. I don't have any institutions that I need to answer to. And I feel sometimes what's happened is they've been in the field for so long that they find it hard to see the wood through the trees. So they know something's wrong, but they're perhaps not articulating everything that's wrong. And when you get an article like the whole genome, blah, 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 of an old kingdom thing, whatever it's called, by these characters, by Moraz, Irish, Wilkinson, etc., there's so much BS in a single article, so much bias, so much deception, so many lies crowded into one article. It almost would probably feel quite daunting for another academic to just come in and critique everything. They probably feel like, am I doing too much here? Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of my view. What do you think about that, Kamji?
Yeah, I just think that it's never too much, really, because we underestimate the amount of manipulation and lies that happen within, academia. Because I think a lot of us have the impression that, these people are professionals. They wouldn't be outwardly racist. They wouldn't try to lie. They wouldn't do any of this stuff. But even as an engineer myself, like when I entered into the field, I didn't know that there was as much racism as there was when I actually had experience. So the more pressure that we apply to these different institutions, I think the more likely they are, or maybe I should say the less likely they are to lie, because they're always going to have some type of anti-Black agenda because of their history. But if we apply the pressure that we're applying now, then it's going to be less, because this is blatant to me. Like when you have like 10 different media outlets all pushing the same propaganda, that's a little bit too blatant. So they're going to try to clean it up.
Yeah. And I get it. To be honest with you, here's the thing, yeah. With the media outlets, strangely enough, I get it with them. They're not academics, and I know each outlet has their own quote unquote specialist in the field. But I've just recently seen a Flint Dibble, who's an archaeologist, online archaeologist. He recently broke down this article. He didn't pick out any critiques. He's a biochemist. Yeah, he actually teaches genetics as part of that's his field of specialism. That's what his PhD's in. And he didn't pick out a single critique in terms of their process, in terms of the way they modeled, in terms of the application of QPADM, in terms of how they misused principal component analysis as a filter. And it contradicted their final decisions anyway. Like all of these things, he didn't find any problem in any of this. He just jumped on and was like, yep, yeah, this is a perfect thing. And guess what? And then he made conclusions about it being a confirmation that modern Egyptians are the ancient Egyptians, and just all of this stuff. He's even adding stuff that the article itself doesn't say. And what that showed me is that even specialists in the field, ultimately, when it comes down to it, most of these guys just read the abstract. Do you know what I mean? Most of them just read the abstract and then, and then just run with it and just be like, yeah, this is what it says. They're not churning through the supplementary data. No. In the case of the media, they're just reading the press release. And trust me, all of this stuff, they didn't just send out the paper. The paper went out of a press release, and the press release already wrote the article that they ended up publishing. They just kind of like put their header on top of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And to give them the benefit of the doubt, I would say that they're lazy journalists, but it's definitely more insidious than that. Like, it's definitely like, this is planned. This is coordinated. Something this blatant, right? Where Without History's video pointed it out. None of the outlets even mentioned that he was born in Africa. He was African. And I got the peer review in the background, and there's like 3 different comments, and I want to go through, about that issue.
Okay, I'm gonna put it up on the stage right now. There you go.
All right. So, right here we're on page 13, and this is the in black is the argument from the peer review, and then in blue is the argument for the authors, right? So right here, the peer reviewers are saying, hey, there's an absence of stable isotope analysis, strontium analysis. And this is just basically radiometrics, trying to determine, where this individual was born. Yeah. Right. What are his dietary patterns, et cetera. This is the type of stuff. Right. So then they agreed and they said, okay, we're going to add the, strontium analysis and, all of the other, isotope analysis in the text, in the supplementary information, right?
Can I pause you just really quickly? Sorry to do that to you. I just want to give a shout out to Surfactant, who made a $5 donation. He said, if peer review was legit, that I've stated the ancient Egyptians were black 100 years ago. And I, well, nothing more to be said there, but I just want to get that off the screen so we can get a full view now.
Oh, definitely. Okay, definitely. And even if I go forward into the actual article where they do the analysis, they basically from the analysis prove that the individual was born in the Nile Valley, that he was an African individual, right? Now that's a really, really important point, because if we scroll down a little bit more, there was another one on this page that I wanted to get into. Oh yeah, this one right here. So this is the part that we really need to, get focus on, right? Because right here it says, I am not totally convinced about Mesopotamian Neolithic ancestry being the most parsimonious source of ancestry present in Nuerat. You could pause right there. This sentence right here, they were trying to push the invading dynastic race theory from this study. This was Schuneman Part 2. Schuneman report said that modern Egyptians have more so-called sub-Saharan African ancestry than ancient Egyptians because of slave trade. We know that that's BS, but that's what they were trying to show with Schuneman. And this was meant to be a follow-up of that study, showing that these are Mesopotamian individuals. And there's another portion of this study where the peer reviewers asked, in this article, they asked, who are the third intermediate period Egyptians? Where is that data source from? And in response, the author said that it was from Abusir Melek, the Shunem-Inatal study, right? So right here, what do they say? They say on PCA extended data 4, for example, Nuerat is clearly positioned between Morocco, Middle Neolithic and Levant Neolithic, Chalcolithic, not towards Mesopotamia Neolithic, right? So, and they basically say that this unsupervised admixture could be very informative. So an unsupervised test is a test where it's not really, it's basically a mathematical model, right? It's not necessarily based upon a certain amount of in-group populations or out-group populations. You just look at it and you basically.
So that's the K number, isn't it?
Exactly.
So they've created their own little ancestral groups, which they've decided are important.
Exactly.
And they assigned them, so they had 14 groups, I believe. So they had 14 groups in their test. And this guy's saying what I said, that they don't seem like they were that relevant.
Yeah, and that's important because a lot of people within genetics test, when they look at these admixture plots and these K plots, the K number is arbitrary, and geneticists don't even agree on what is the most accurate K number. It kind of varies, from scholar to scholar. And also what people have to understand is that it's a mathematical and statistical inference. It doesn't represent an ancient population. It doesn't represent an actual group of people. It's basically what they've inferred with respect to the data that they have available, right? And that's an unsupervised. Now, the supervised is where we get into a little bit of a mess, because even if I scroll down to page...
Before you scroll down, sorry, I have to read the next sentence, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because, hold your thought, because I'm going to give you the floor, but it's just because this is what we talked about in the last live stream, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm going to read the next sentence that says, however, a strong emphasis is put on Neolithic Mesopotamia, and I am concerned that this result is based mostly on the criteria implemented for model selection in the QPADM framework.
Exactly.
Now, for those of you who are on the live stream, that's going over your head a little bit. This is what I was talking about. The QPADM model being the idea that they've pre-selected these populations, and it basically uses a best fit model. So the persons whose ancestry is being modeled against these populations has to come out being a percentage of what's in front of them.
Yeah.
That's it. They have to come out a percentage of what's in front of them. There's no option B. So if I was modeled against 50 Europeans and 50 Chinese people, and I came out 80% closer to the Europeans than I did to the Chinese people, I'd come out 80% European, 20% Chinese, but I'm a black Nigerian. Do you understand? It doesn't. The model, the QPADM outputs are 100% based on what you're measuring against. It has to give an output. We'll never turn around and go, oh, we can only find a 1% match, because when it doesn't find a match, it goes into the best fit approach. So this is how they are stealing. This is how they're stealing. This is how they're changing the ancestry or changing the ethnicity of people by putting them through these models, saying, oh, well, the model says they're 80% Moroccan, 20. Well, that's because you didn't have anyone else other than Moroccans from Africa. He might have zero Moroccan ancestry, zero Mesopotamian ancestry. We don't know that. All we know is that's what's come out of the machine that they've run his data through. Sorry, I'm gonna hand back to you now, because I'm glad that a peer reviewer has said something that I was able to pick out totally independent of reading this article. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a huge point, and I glad you mentioned that, because again, like, the tools that they use are not perfect. Largely they're statistical, and what you'll notice, the same thing with Gordine and Shamarka Keita's analysis of the Shunem et al. Study. They said that sampling bias is one of the biggest things that skews, genetic results in the wrong direction. So with this QPADM specifically, just the fact that they didn't include Modaman, like, to me, and that's going to be the next thing we're talking about on page 17, that's huge, because, if you wanted to prove Afroasiatic, Afroasiatic is from the Red Sea Hills. We both know that within the, Obenga Diopian school of, historical linguistics, there's a lot of challenges against Afroasiatic. And in general, with respect to historical linguistics, period. But just the fact that they didn't include that here is really telling, right? So you see this comment, it says pre-Bronze Age genomes are not available for the rest of the Maghreb. Not true for the Maghreb, right? And then they modified that. Then it says from Mota, Ethiopia, or any individuals in Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa. I only see Ethiopia 4500 BP in figure 2, and also South Africa 2200 BP in extended data. It would be very interesting to see if there is shared ancestry between Nuerat and pastoral Neolithic East Africans. So right there, they're saying, wait a minute, you didn't compare this to any Africans.
Yep.
You just came in trying to prove Mesopotamian. You didn't, you use Moda as an out group. They moved. So like, not only did they not, try to prove Afro-Asiatic and, slam dunk, so Obenga was wrong, right? They didn't even include it. It's an out group. Like right there, like burn the entire.
Can you explain to my audience what an out group is?
So an out group is when you're doing F-stats and you're trying to measure admixture between populations or genetic drift between populations. There's a variety of tools. You have F2 statistics, F3 statistics, D stats. And basically what they're trying to do is define the level of mixture between related groups. They'll use out groups that are not related, like a chimpanzee, like a Neanderthal. And the out group is supposed to be so extremely unrelated that it helps parse out the relationship between the closely related populations.
Outrageous. And here's what's funny as well. I don't know if you noticed, but I was looking at their admixture clustering, and they had some Sudanese early Christians who even on the basis of the results of their admixture clustering looked, obviously it's a visual thing, so you can only say so far, but looked to me to be one of the, if not the closest match to there. And then they didn't include him in the QPADM. Why didn't they include the Sudanese early Christians who clearly, from the looks of it, looked like they were clustering relatively closely to the Nuerat man? I don't know if you noticed that as well.
It's malpractice. I definitely did. It's malpractice because Moda Man is not the only one, that they could have used. And I actually have here in the background, let me see if I could bring this up. Here, let me see if I could share it. Am I only allowed to share one, or can I share multiple?
I think can you pull it over this screen? Are you sharing the screen, or
I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna share this.
No, you don't have to stop. You can just leave it there. I can switch them over.
Okay, for sure. So if I share this is the key.
While you're doing that, let me share something really quickly. So I'm gonna go back to my QPADM for those of you who didn't know how it works. I just want to give a visual of this, exactly how it works, okay? Because I did this before, but I think this visual is quite useful. So on the left, we got this visual of let's just call him an African man, for want of a better word, okay? He gets plugged into a QPADM model. The QPADM model has nothing but European and, let's just say, Asian samples, okay? By the time he comes out of that, he's going to look something like this, okay? Half Asian, half European. There's no other option. He cannot come out looking the way that he went in. He has to come out as a hybrid of the data that he was modeled against. That's the only option. So when they say things like, if you've got to plug someone in, the stupidity that we're having this discussion, they've plugged this Egyptian from, from the old kingdom into a QPADM model that only has Eurasian and one, or a couple of North African samples. That's it, nothing else in there. And then when it's come out looking Eurasian and North African, but more North African than anything, because that's the closest thing to Africa. But anyway, we won't go into that. They go, oh, well, look, well, no sub-Saharan, like they don't know what they've just done. It's the most nefarious use of tech that you could even think about. But yeah, that's I just want to kind of stress that point there. Let me now remove and allow you to.
Yeah, I try to do both, but I don't think it's going to work for me now. But yeah, so this is just an example of, just some of the findings that I made with respect to this. Let me see if I could go full screen, and you can still see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my little, back and forth with Ernesto, Ernesto, the cosplaying North African. So
I thank you for exposing, by the way, because my way of dealing with him, I just ignore him because he's clearly wants my attention. He's a bit obsessed. Yeah. But I just ignore him because I've tried. The funny thing is, I've tried this course in him many times and said, let's do a live debate. And he refuses to, partly because I know he's pretending to be a girl, which is obviously a bit weird. So he can't come out and do a live stream because he can't let people hear his real voice. And partly because obviously he knows what he's doing is a total grift and he wouldn't be able to stand up to a live discussion. So now I just ignore him. I just refuse to engage with him. I don't even know if he's released a new video, but I like the fact that you did that big expose. That was sweet. So, respect for that. I did enjoy it.
Most depth. In terms of when the abstract of this paper was released, it was released, I think, like 2 years ago. And, some of the data was leaked, because they thought they got a W. And they said, oh, this Nuerat is EZ830. This is a North African haplotype. This has nothing to do with infra-Saharan Africans. And that's BS. That's totally a lie, because if you look at EM293, and my analysis of EM293 comes from, looking at, the so-called Bantu populations of Central and Southern Africa, and many of them articulating being related to the pharaonic civilization, right? And I figured, hey, maybe there's some type of phylogenetic connection. So when you look at EM293, this is in Congo, this is in the Swahili coast, this is in Zimbabwe, this is all throughout, Southern Africa in the so-called Bantu populations. This is from Northeast Africa. This EM293 is a descendant of EZ830 that they found in Nuerat, right?
Yes.
This clearly connects Nuerat, as an ancestral proxy to not only, East African pastoral Neolithic groups that they even admitted in the study, forced them to. Bless you.
Thank you.
Right. So they were forced to admit that, he is an ancestor to the East African pastoral Neolithic groups, but also to so-called Bantu populations. If you look at EM293 as well,
that is absolutely criminal. Sorry, I just want to pause on that. I don't want people to kind of like miss out on this because they've hung their hat on a few things. Obviously, we've already just spoken about what they've done with the whole genome in terms of running it through this QPADM. But then looking at the uniparental marker, so looking at this Y-DNA, that's your paternal lineage, they've picked out this marker. And here's the ironic thing. I'm sure you remember when E was just classified as African. Anything E was African. And now that doesn't see. Now, since they want to claim the Green Sahara now, they want to claim certain E clades as being Eurasian. But anyway, I'm not even going to go into that. But the point being that you've got this marker that they're hanging half of their analysis on. Oh, well, the marker's consistent with blah, blah, blah. And you're saying that basically most of Central East Africa are descended from a variation of that very marker that they're hanging their hat on.
Yep, a descendant of that marker. So it's just like it just exposes them. So on the mtDNA, right? They say we have N1A and I. This proves that it was not a sub-Saharan. This proves that it was a Eurasian. But if you look at the highest level of I, it's in the El Molo and Rendile in northern Kenya. They have the highest the highest amount of I. So they could have easily said, hey, like this population, not only is it related to East African pastoral Neolithic as an ancestral proxy, but at the same time, it has a close relationship to these northern Kenyan groups. But that kind of debunks the Mesopotamian link, right? So they definitely didn't want to go there.
This is it's just outrageous. I'm so glad you're breaking this down, because even as you're doing it, I was looking into the fact that the North African lineage that they've kind of given to him comes from the I believe is it the Takakori?
No, it's actually from the SKH Middle Neolithic in Morocco. And I didn't get actually in one of my videos, I did a deep dive into that, where I said essentially that's a Natufian. Essentially, that's what they're arguing. They're arguing that it's a Natufian because in the article that they reference for the Middle Neolithic Morocco, one of the proxy groups in their admixture plot is a so-called Levantine hunter-gatherer, which we know is a Natufian. So they never actually go out or come out and say it, but they leave you little breadcrumbs and clues, to get into that.
So, okay, cool. So, carry on.
So again, this is King space. When you're dealing with the supplementary data and credit, and me and King were talking about this in the back chat. Literally, they said that their cranial database was predominantly Eurasian. They didn't compare Nuerat to any Black African skulls. Therefore, genetically, it was Eurasian. That does
just to jump on that. So the cranial database that they did have Black samples on it, but they were so divergent, deliberately chosen. Basically, the database they compared it to was a database that was formed in 1980. So it's an old one. And obviously, it was probably one of those responses to Diop. Do you know what I mean? One of that kind of era of anthropology where they're trying to whiteify everything. And they deliberately, the samples that are in there, or at least the 4 sample groups that are in there, are basically very extreme on the quote unquote true Negro spectrum. Okay, so it's very kind of extreme on the true Negro spectrum. They've picked groups that they know, or at least the sample. We don't know. The thing is, we don't even get to see the samples. There's so few samples that they could cherry pick the ones that they know are going to be divergent from. But the fact of the matter is, having 4 sample groups to represent Africa is crazy work. 4 samples can't represent a tribe or an ethnicity in Africa, let alone the African continent. That is crazy work. And meanwhile, they have over 40. I think there's about 40. No, sorry, let me do the maths there quickly. They have 60 something groups representing Eurasians. And they added some as well, by the way, prior to the study, added 12 more Eurasian groups. So the Eurasians, who don't, just like Surfactant has just said, don't have that much diversity in terms of their phenotype, have got every base covered in terms of their different expressions, of phenotype. But the Africans, who have probably 20 times the diversity of Europe, have 4 groups representing the entire continent. And then we're surprised that some Africans are clustering closer to the Eurasians than, I was saying to you earlier, how close do you think my skull is going to cluster with the average Quena person, hunter-gatherer? It's going to be far. I'll be easily closer to Eurasians. Definitely. I know that for a fact.
I mean, Africa has the most, craniometric diversity on the planet. A lot of people think that we only have dolichocephalic skulls, which we do have the most prominent dolichocephalic skulls. I mean, some do try to say, did you know that the Nordics are dolichocephalic? The Nordics don't have tropical body proportions or dark to black skin. So, you know what I'm saying? And even here, like, I'm being nice by calling this academic malpractice. This is blatant anti-black propaganda. Like, this is terrible propaganda with what they did here. So,
and it just reminds me of a conversation that I actually had with Sasha Enriquez, the PhD candidate. I think I'll be able to call her doctor in about a month, which I look forward to because she's probably the most brilliant person I've spoken to in the field of genetics. And she was explaining to me how far behind in terms of, she said the actual field of genetics is really progressive. They understand the need to tap into Africa's diversity. They understand the need to increase sampling. The field of genetics, and I'm talking about medical genetics, is not the same as this field of population genetics, which sits inside anthropology. She said anthropology is well behind. It's decades behind. They're still living in the Stone Age in terms of their outlook and in terms of the way they gatekeep and the way that they do these studies. So even she acknowledged that. I feel like, and this is something that I'm not going to say with authority, but I feel like from the various conversations that I had, that these population geneticists in the field of genetics, the wider field, they're looked at slightly as quacks. Because even if you talk to people who are genetics experts and not population genetics, they laugh at the fact that any conclusions are being drawn from uniparental marker lineages. They're like, this is ridiculous. You're talking about one ancestor in in a billion, if you go back, I don't know, less than 1,000 years. You know, it's ludicrous that you're going to make any statements about race, culture, this, that, and the other, anything based on a uniparental marker, and yet they do it routinely. So I don't think they're respected outside of media and amongst their own little cabal. At least that's my interpretation.
No, I agree with that. A lot of people, you know, as you said, they think that they're quacks. They think that population genetics is pseudoscience. You know, I've spoken to scholars. I think there's one, I think it's the University College of London out there, where they basically exposed, they have like a bunch of articles on their website, and they expose the fact that genetics is a for-profit industry, and there's a lot of these different institutions that are sampling genes and basically trying to give Europeans and Eurasian populations a connection to antiquity. And there's a lot of racial politics, because in the same vein, like, they want to connect themselves to the origin of civilization while removing Black people from that same conversation, right? That kind of drives a lot of the impetus. Like, they weren't Black. Like, that's just basically, like, you know, the intent behind a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go back to your last slide really quickly, sorry, because I just want to jump on a really important point that you made in regards to, okay, yeah, someone is dolichocephalic. You can't just go, okay, that person's Black because they got dolichocephaly. I totally understand that. But I think the point that you made is the point that we make, and the point my latest videos made. So by the way, if you're in the live and you've watched the video that I dropped about 2 hours ago, just give me a little shout. I say, yeah, I've been there, or something like that. Just give me a little shout. Let me know you watched it. But that video, I stack up the data that's within this study, by the way, on top of each other. And it's just like, it's the law of probabilities. Okay, having dolichocephaly doesn't necessarily mean you're Black. It probably weights it maybe 70% in the favor of Blacks versus non-Blacks. But then having dolichocephaly and then pre-brigmatic depression in your skull, that ups it now into probably the 90s. Having that, and then having super tropical limb proportions, or Black people's limb proportions, at that point we're past the point where, you know, we're using percentages now. Now we're talking about to the power of, you know, in terms of it being a Black person. You're not really going to get non-Black people who have super tropical limb proportions, dolichocephalic skulls, and pre-brigmatic depression in their skull. And then if you just want to put the cherry on the cake, the bloody Hirisplex model, the DNA, says he was Black. So his skin was Black. So at what point do we kind of like end this discussion or end this debate? Because the fact of the matter is, they've wanted to have this argument, and this is all of the people, the kind of like the anti-Black crowd, you know, all of them. They've wanted to have this argument, oh, the Egyptians weren't Black, they were tan, this, that, and the other. Well, you know what? You have your whole genome sample now. You made a massive song and dance about the 20% Mesopotamian fudging that you did to give them a little bit of outside of Africa. Yeah, you made a massive song and dance about it, but your own model came back and said he was Black. And we now have the capability to do that with all the mummies. Don't tell me you can't get whole genome from that New Kingdom lineage. Those mummies are preserved very well. Don't tell me you can't get whole genome from Tutankhamun's tooth. You can, and we can run them all through the Hirisplex, and we can end this discussion about what race they are. And then when you lose the race discussion, we can start another discussion which is what they're doing now, trying to say, well, you know, they were Black, but they were more related to us than you. Like someone was doing just the other day with me talking about Cheddar Man. Oh yeah, well, he was Black, but he's more related to the Brits than to Sub-Saharans. Is that your cope? Is that your cope now? Now you've lost the Black argument. Is this your new cope? Yeah, you gotta try and move it along and try and fudge relationship with these people. It's like it's a joke, man.
I mean, I wouldn't even say that that's a new coat, because Black Caucasian has been around at least since the 19th century.
True. It's a resurrection, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. This is Hamitic race theory over again, isn't it?
Yeah, they're just recycling the same arguments.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to one of our favorites, Mr. Joel Irish. And Joel Irish,
I'm so glad you picked out, because I knew I wasn't seeing things with this guy. I read all of this guy's studies, and he is something else, man. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, Joel, I was hip to his game, when he did that article about the Kithians. I think he connected the Saharan groups to a lot of the Bantu populations, just looking for affinities with relation to dental morphology. And he did something that I thought was like super manipulative and deceptive. Kevin McDonald did a similar thing, where Kevin McDonald was saying that Diop was trying to connect ancient Kemet with West Africa, which there is no connection, but there is a connection between Nubia and West Africa technologically. And then Joel Irish, he did the same thing. He said, no, Diop was claiming that the Yoruba are from the Nile Valley, but this has been debunked. If you look at the dental morphology of the Yoruba, it actually shows that they come from the Great Lakes, and this is an East Bantu back migration into West Africa. But if you look at his analysis, what Diop was saying is that ancient Kemet and West Africans come from the same pre-dialectical ancestor that is in the Great Lakes region, headed into, from Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, all the way up into South Sudan. If you look at his migration model, he's showing West Africans coming from the more upper regions of the Nile Basin, where that area is. So when I saw them mischaracterize, particularly Joel Irish mischaracterize, Diop, his analysis of the Yoruba, I knew that he was a fraud. I just knew it at that point. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago. Now with this, where he was over the dental morphology, and they had less than half of the, I think it was like 15 out of 32 Acutus traits, less than half of the traits were able to be retained. And from that, they said, okay, it definitely wasn't an African. It definitely was. It was related to Eurasians as opposed to African populations. And the peer reviewers flagged this, and they're like, wait a minute, like you can't do this. Like, this is not that, it's not scientific to conclude, especially when you look at something like the canine mesial ridge. The canine mesial ridge, sometimes called the Bushman, which is a racist term, but they call that the so-called Bushman canine.
Yeah,
that's seen in pre-dynastic Kemet. Like a southern Coena hunter-gatherer trait is seen in the pre-dynastic period, right? So, like, right off the bat, like it was just completely flawed, for Joel Irish to be over the dental morphology and to make this claim, even though they had less than half of the traits. And on top of that, they increased coverage of the genome from 0.22, in a previous abstract. I think I have that in the next slide. But they, where is that at? It's further down the line. But they increased it using a teeth extract. So they increased the coverage. And for those who don't know, coverage is like how refined or how, like, close to the detail or a fine comb that the genetic analysis is. They increased the coverage of the genome with a teeth extract from 0.22 to like 2 point something. So,
they're basically focusing on one aspect of the cranium that they feel has the most favorable lean towards Eurasian phenotypic traits, and they're amplifying its relevance in terms of the outcomes.
Yes,
which is what they do with the DNA. It's the same trick being used over and over and over again. So it doesn't matter if this is the one thing I saw about this paper. It doesn't matter if we're talking about genetics. Doesn't matter if we're talking about. They tried to do it even with I don't know if did you see their limb proportions analysis? They were desperate, and in the end, the final conclusion they came to with the limb proportions was that, now bear in mind, Nuerat man fell exactly on the black algorithm for his limb portions, like precisely. I think he was 1 millimeter out, which is like, you know, compared to the 4 centimeters out he was for whites, he was right on the black algorithm. Even then, they didn't want to say he clustered with the blacks. They said, well, we feel he clustered more with the ancient Egyptians who kind of have their own lane. Now, the ancient Egyptian lane runs parallel. In fact, it runs right through the black algorithm. And the only reason it does that because they haven't got enough samples to really make it its own group. This is how desperate they are. They just don't want to turn around and just be like, oh yeah, he fell, anything fell on the black part of our discussion. It has to be, oh, when it's black, they have to now create a new, you know, a new subgroup. But when it comes to relating their DNA and stuff, everything gets aligned with Eurasian. These people are absolutely bonkers. Quick one before I'll give you the mic again. Let me give a quick shout out to Hebrew in Business. Thank you very much for your $10 donation, brother. You're much appreciated. I'm assuming you're a brother. You could be a sister, so forgive me, but thank you very much for whoever you are. That's much appreciated. Yeah, sorry. And also one other thought I had as well. In fact, it's a bit of a question before you move on from Joel Irish. Yeah. Do you feel like they also play the game of not being like, none of these guys who are in this study are actually, well, actually, I think they do have a couple, but they don't really get to say much. I didn't hear much from the actual archaeologists, the historians. So they play this game where they make these really bold and brash claims, and then they justify them with a very rudimentary understanding of ancient Egypt's history. And I broke this down when I did the first live stream. They made all these claims and they talked about, oh, well, you know, blah, blah. We know there was like linguistic influence between Mesopotamia and Egypt. No, there wasn't. There's zero linguistic. They're complete isolates from each other. 100% isolates. But they've made that claim and they kind of ride this wave of not being well, I'm not an Egyptologist. I'm a geneticist or population geneticist. So I don't have to get the history right. But you're using one to prove the other. So you have to be getting them both right. Do you understand what I mean? And they kind of play on the fact that we can't take them to task because I made this claim, but I'm not a historian, so I'm allowed to make those kind of mistakes.
Yeah, and even on that point, just to piggyback, like if you look at, you know, the medical geneticist like Dr. J.P. Gourdin, Jean-Philippe Gourdin, like he analyzed a lot of the pathogens of ancient Kemet. And then if you look at sickle cell anemia, the HBS, you know, Benin sickle cell haplotype from West Africa is in Kemet, right? It's even in the Levant, right? So it shows you that Africans spread into the Levant as well. If you look at tuberculosis from the Middle Kingdom, the tuberculosis that they have the L5 and L6 strain in the Middle Kingdom. That's connected to Senegambia, right? If you look at the Abusir Malek, the Shunaminatau study, where they analyze leprosy, the leprosy genotype, they have the 3L genotype, you know, in that sample, and that's related to Afro-Brazilian populations as well as populations of Martinique, which we know are Black. And finally, the schistosomes or the human pathogens that deals with schistosomiasis disease, that actually came from Central Africa or the Great Lakes region, you know, which is connected to what Diopen Obenga visualized as the pre-dialectical ancestor for Paleo-African or Niger-Egyptian populations. But the subsequent migration of the schistosomes actually tells the full story because it goes from the Great Lakes region into the Nile Delta of Kemet. And then afterwards, it spreads to West Africa. Then it spreads to Central and Southern Africa, you know, coinciding, you know, with the so-called Bantu groups as well as modern West African groups. So when you look at the diseases of ancient Kemet, the overwhelming majority of them connect to Inner Africa, without a doubt. And it just speaks to what you said before. Medical genetics is way above, you know, this anthropological pseudoscience of population genetics.
Absolutely. Quick shout out to Passport and Profits for your $5 donation. He said, like Kamji said, it's anti-Black propaganda, not science. Black DNA equals excludes sample. They're excluding data points that doesn't give support to their agenda. And actually, I'm going to just quickly build on that as well. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, But this is going back to, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, the fact that when I say there's faulty foundations, even the analysis that's being done, all of the analytical tools, a lot of people don't realize many of these are already Eurocentric. They're already weighted towards European genetics. So the problem is that the analysis that's being done is based on Eurocentric SMP arrays. Okay, so they've decided these markers or these clusters of markers are important to European genetics. They show differentiation between European groups. The ones that show differentiation between African groups and are African specific, normally the ones that they don't actually carry, they've discarded those, or they don't include those in their analysis. And it's those markers or that aspect that's really going to give us information about African populations and about African groups, but they're not even getting analyzed. So everything is already weighted towards Eurocentric outcomes. You spoke earlier about Rick Kittles, and I do really hope, because I know he's got his own genetic testing lab and that, and he says that, you know, his kind of like tagline is that they specialize in African genetics. I don't know if he's done a job of actually reversing that trend and actually picking up some of these discarded African SMP arrays and actually utilize and testing that as part of his outcomes, or if he's just got a different spin on the SMP arrays that everyone uses, which are Eurocentrically weighted. But it'll just be interesting to know where he is in that, because it would be good to have someone on our side who's actually done that job of rejecting the faulty foundations that they've created, you know?
Yeah, and I just even think that we need to start, you know, building the next generation of geneticists within African institutions, because, you know, Rick Kittles is amazing for his work, but a lot of this stuff, like, they have government funding, you know, on their side. So we're going to have, you know, some of the righteous African nations and institutions around the world, you know, put up funds to be able to support a lot of this research, because us, you know, we're doing this out of the sweat of our brow, you know, blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of times it could be a thankless job, but at the same time, like, debunking the propaganda is important for future generations. But if not for us, you know, you just have people dealing with the propaganda and not having any tools to combat it, right? So it has to be a full-fledged, you know, multi-pronged approach of resources, funding, and institutional advocacy for us to really be able to correct a lot of the propaganda in these fields.
Absolutely. Let me do a bit of housekeeping now. We got 276 people, nearly 300, 280, nearly 300 people on the live stream, which is an amazing audience. Thank you guys for being the usual amazing crowd you have. You are. We've only got 125 likes though, people. So 300 in the live stream. I don't think there's any excuse for that. Can we get the likes up at least to the number of people that are in the live stream? Question from Sir Facton is: have you guys ever heard of Virginia Steen McIntyre? She had the nerve to prove America was populated greater than 12,000 years ago. Her career was destroyed. It seems. I don't know. I don't know that story, but thank you for sharing. I'm sure there's something in there that we can look into. And I think I've got one more shout out. Again, Hebrew in Business says, how can we have you get your PhD so that we can start changing this? Or what can we do? Well, look, I'm Nigerian and I'm going to speak very stereotypical here. Well, you don't have to ask me twice about getting more qualifications. Yeah. Yeah. We live for that, you know. So I think that's a hangover from my yeah. So look, you could start by buying the book, and if I can start overfunding for that, then I might just end up starting a PhD, because I know that I won't have to ever go back to work again, which would be bloody awesome. So anyway, that'll be a good starting point. But thank you very much. You know, let's get as many qualified people as possible. I'm gonna excite everyone. Well, not excite everyone, but just kind of put the word out. There's a guy whose name I'm not gonna mention because he might not want to mention, but he's doing his master's in anthropology right now as a direct. I know I've been a massive influence in him getting there. And there's also someone I know who's starting their genetics degree. All influenced by our community, by what's going on here. So I think the building word that you just mentioned, Kamji, I feel like that's happening, man. I feel like we realize now, in realizing our history, I think we also realize that there's work to be done. Yeah, there's work to be done. We need to actually start to, because my outlook has always been very simple regarding this. I don't want to rely at all on Eurocentric foundations of academia. I want us to have our in its entirety, from the base upwards. I want everything to be grown from African/Black/melanated academics. I want us to have everything ourselves and not have to rely on them for degrees, not have to rely on them for PhDs, not have to rely on them for books, nothing. Because I think that that's the only way. And then if the worst comes to worse and we end up having our own education system and they have their own education system and they're completely at odds with each other, who cares?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Ultimately, I don't care. You can believe what you want. I think they will believe what they want regardless. So, you know.
Yeah, right now, like the Chinese scientific consensus is growing in terms of admiration and rapport on the international level. So there will be a time in the future that's going to be really soon where Western scientists are no longer, you know, the hottest thing on the block. They're going to be replaced. So we have to do our part in terms of building African scientists and the African scientific institution so that the African perspective also has the same amount of authority.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's, you know, I think also people might be surprised at the fact that we're not that far from that reality. Okay, people like, you know, Ibrahim Traore should be you know, should be an indication of how close we are to that, you know.
Close.
I mean, look at think about legacy. Look at Traore's proximity to, you know, the great, you know, Mali and the University of Sankore. You know, I mean, that's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from those lands, you know, that in those Sahelian lands, you know, they have that legacy, they have that history. And so he's got to know, because I know he's a smart guy already, he's got to already know that our institutions don't need their input. If you look at my, you know, we created the educational institution. The modern educational institution was created in West Africa. Facts. To be very, very clear about that. It was created in Timbuktu, Mali, Jene. This is where Songhai, this is where the modern institution of education came from. This is where we get our idea of degrees. This is where we get our idea of diplomas. All of this comes from West Africa. This is where we get the idea of book production en masse. Okay, this is where we get the idea of lecturers. Everything comes from Africa. So we don't need to lean on Eurocentrism and their kind of like modern hijacking of the education system in order to build, you know, what we want to build on the continent or in different be it in other melanated nations, other native nations, indigenous, other whatever it is. We can build it using with our own ingenuity and with our own resources. And I firmly believe in that. I'm gotta stand on that, you know, 10 toes down.
100%. 100%. Yeah. So you can get back into it. And this is a really important slide because it deals with the framework, basically the framework of the analysis. We already went into the facts that if you look at the peer review document, they came in with an invading dynastic race theory agenda. That's what they wanted to prove. And the peer reviewers flagged them and they said, no, Mesopotamian Neolithic is not the majority ancestry. You guys need to fix this up. So with respect to what they got, you know, them trying to promote a so-called Levantine back migration, really a Natufian back migration. And again, that wouldn't really mean much if you look at the fact that craniofacially, the Natufians are connected to so-called Niger-Congo populations, according to the research. But even if you take all of that in, these basal Eurasian sources in the Nuerat Old Kingdom mummy may reflect ancestral North African gene flow, right? Or drift from an ancestral North African source rather than Levantine back migration, right? So genetic drift is where, you know, two populations could have diverged from an ancestor within the Paleolithic times, and then drift happened, random selection happened within one genome to make it look like the other, right? Now, without accurate analysis, a pseudoscientific population geneticist would say, oh, this proves that group 1 got gene flow from group 2. No, it doesn't prove that, because genetic drift happens all the time, right?
And you just don't have enough ancient DNA to even make a conclusion like that.
Exactly.
Once again, it's this first past the post approach. It's kind of like, oh well, this place, we've got the oldest example maybe of this, these genes showing up. But you also know that the place that you've looked in has excellent preservation of corpses for for a long time, excellent preservation of DNA, and the place that you're claiming is the secondary inheritor has awful preservation of ancient DNA, and so you've got nothing to compare it against that's contemporaneous. It's like,
and Basil is hypothetical. Basil is hypothetical. That's what y'all should know. Basil, when they're saying Basal Eurasian, a more accurate designation would be out of Africa hub. I've seen certain scholars use that, or just ancestral North African, right? Yeah. So that should be the default setting, is that if you find affinities between these Paleolithic and so-called Neolithic African populations and Eurasians, you should say this must be ancestral North African genes that left Africa, which is why we see it across, Eurasia. Yeah. And the tool, the F4 tool that they use, it's sensitive to outgroup selection. If you take the wrong outgroup, like Modaman being an outgroup in Ethiopia, it's going to completely skew the results, right? And they know this. Right? And you can kind of see this up here. This is a chart where, you see ancient East Africa, then that goes into early ancestral North Africa. Then that goes into the Saharan. And then you see the basal North African hunter-gatherers. And then that goes all the way down into West Atlantic or Atlantic West African. So you can kind of see the way that modern African populations from East to West Africa kind of descend, from these ancestral North African populations. And what they're trying to say is that Nuerat was all the way to the right, over here somewhere, which it's just
everything's split. And this is the thing. You once you realize their terminologies, you realize exactly what they're trying to do, because anything that's African, they want to create a split, and they want that split to be as old as possible.
Yeah.
But then when African genetics inevitably show overlap, they use that key term which you've used already, back migration. Back migration is always the explanation as to when these markers or these genetic patterns show up in Africans. And then they use, and I always speak about this, they use Africans' genetic diversity against us, because we're so diverse. The whole thing about diversity is when you're very diverse, there can't be too much of any one group. That's just the nature of being diverse. Okay. Yep. When you're not diverse, everybody looks like the same thing. And that proves that you all descend from something very recently. Yeah. You've got a very recent common ancestor. When you're really diverse, like Africans, you can't have too much of one thing, because where's the diversity going to stay? The diversity is spread amongst. So we have, but it doesn't mean that that's not where it originated. It just means it originated from a diverse group. And then that diverse group, maybe a couple of people or a few people, moved out in various introgressions into the European continent and carried their genes with them. Yep, but it doesn't, just because we have it at a less frequency or lower frequency than they do on the Eurasian plains, it doesn't mean that it didn't originate right where it's found.
Yeah, and quite frankly, like LeBron man, which is like 7,000 years ago, like that would be the Mesolithic period of Spain, had dark skin and was lactose intolerant. Scholars call him a Euro-African or an African that went to Europe. So like the more you go back, like the more silly it is just to disconnect, from African populations.
But I think you don't know one rule. I've got to read out a few donations as well. But there's one rule that I'm not sure if you're aware of. I've spoke about this on the channel, and it's called the Eurasian. It's called the European or the Eurasian force field rule. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this, and that's the moment an African steps out of Africa into Europe, he becomes a European. And everything about him, everything about his offspring, he immediately no longer is African and never was. he becomes a European. That's how it works. It doesn't. That's just how it works. It doesn't work the other way around. So a European coming back into Africa, that's just called a back migration. Okay, doesn't change the origins, but an African going into Europe always becomes a European. That's just the way it works. That's the way the analysis works. You know. Let me just do a quick couple shout outs because otherwise these are going to pile up, and I'm very grateful for that, by the way. Surfactant gave me a $5 donation. He says, talking about the person he mentioned earlier, Virginia Steen McIntyre. He says he brings it up as an example of what they do to any scientist that strays from their agenda. And this is a big thing. We won't go into it right now, but there's a lot of fear in Egyptology. So as much as I think a lot of these people are on the payroll of, you know, maybe Egyptian antiquities, because they're the ones who are commissioning the studies, I also think there is a fear element. So I'm glad that you raised that point. Macy says we have go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Macy says we have to have our own systems and we don't need outside validation. Totally agree with you, Macy. You know, we're on the same wavelength there. Massive shout out to Deshaun. Thank you for your very generous $20 donation. He says, I'm African American and my roots are Nigerian. Bawoni. Okay, I'm good, man. How are you, brother? Thanks for keeping the truth alive. Absolutely, my brother. Thank you very much for your donation. And finally, Gentle, I want to say this right. Bieringiro. Okay, sorry if I butchered your name. Gentle Bieringiro has donated 20 euros and he says, hey, I just came across your content and I'm really enjoying it. Been watching non-stop. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, man. And you are very, very welcome here at the King's Monologue. You're going to have a great time in my community because, like I said, we are literally, yeah, you'll see. Go through the comments and you'll see what kind of the community we are. So thank you very much for that. So over to you, Camjuverse.
No worries, no issues. This is something that, you know, Pan-African James, you know, brought to my attention. It's just the fact that usually within genetic studies, you know, if you're trying to say that a population was Eurasian and not African, you're going to use Neanderthal, especially within an outgroup analysis to basically see how many, you know, Neanderthal related alleles or affinities that a population has.
Sorry, say that again. Rewind and say that again, because these are the very basic aspects of logic that can be applied. Yeah.
Yes.
If you want to prove that a group, I would say, is related to modern Europeans, then Neanderthal ancestry percentage would be a very good, very good marking point, wouldn't it? Sorry, carry on.
Absolutely. And they didn't even mention Neanderthals in the study. At all. Previous studies of all African populations, modern Egyptian Arabs and Copts have the most Neanderthal affinity of any other population on the continent, right?
Sorry, Paul, you're going to have to repeat that again. I don't want anyone to miss what he's saying here, okay? So not only do we know that Neanderthal ancestry does work as a relatively good differentiator between African and non-African groups, okay? We also have the added aspect that the very people who are debating ancestry, that is these Arabs, the people who are kind of like inhabiting the Middle East now, they carry the highest proportion of Neanderthal ancestry. Sorry, I wanted to say that slowly because I don't want anyone to miss that important point. Carry on.
Yeah, on the African continent. So it's just like the peer reviewers, if you wanted to find Eurasian affinities, not only because they caught them in terms of, you know, omitting, you know, African, inter-African, infra-Saharan African populations, but they should have been like, hey, what's the Neanderthal admixture? Show us the Neanderthal admixture. That will, but the fact that they didn't even mention it shows me that they knew it was zero, right? And if it's zero, it could be no other than a Black African person. Period.
If it's been omitted, that means they've looked and they didn't like the outcome. Just like they didn't put, I know already what Motorman did to their QPADM. I already know what Motorman did to that. Yeah, we know.
Yeah,
we know what Motorman did to that.
I ran it, and not only Motorman, but even if you look at East African, which is going to be in a next slide,
Yeah.
If you look at East African Neolithic and East African Paleolithic, because they have ancient DNA from the Great Lakes, and you combine that with Modaman, with Tafarat, Takakuri, Nuerat is smack dab in the middle as a mixture of those populations. So, you know,
there you go.
And we're going to get into, where is that? Yeah, it's the next one. So the Vanessa Davies, nubiologist, she describes studies like the Merezetal study, studies like Schunemann as the genetic version of the invading pharaonic race theory, the invading dynastic race theory, that white Mesopotamians came into Kemet and set up civilization and built the pyramids. It's just racist 18th, 19th century theories that these population geneticists are trying to resurrect in their field, right? Yeah. So we have to understand the framework. There's frameworks that undergird the analysis within these studies. And if you have the wrong framework, then you're going to have a bad methodology and it's going to skew the results.
Absolutely. Pause you really quickly there. Big shout out to Kadir. Thank you very much, brother. Always here and always generous. Like many of you, to be honest with you. The fact that these people get to publish these methodologically flawed and extremely misleading papers in major journals like Nature is just bullshit, man. Disgusting. And I agree with you. And Nature should be ashamed of themselves, because Nature do this seems to be periodically now. Yeah. As soon as they see one of these BS studies, I know it's going to be Nature that's publishing it. So
no, they definitely do. So this is going to be, and I don't know if everybody could see, I think I have it in, I have it in the next one. This is just a PCA chart that I made because again, PCA, QPADM, F-stats, they definitely have their flaws and they should be corroborated with other fields. But you could use AI tools like DeepSeek, ChatGPT, Gemini for Google, and you could get the raw data. There's actually a site that I'm going to send you after the live that shows the full collection of all ancient DNA. Shout out to James, Pan-African James, for sending me that. And you could take these raw samples and run the analysis yourself, right? So if you look at this here, we have Tafarat. Right.
Before you start on this, really quickly, because I'm going to be honest, because obviously we're having, and my skeptic hat is, this is the point where my skeptic hat goes on.
Sure.
Because from what I told you earlier, I need to know that what we're classifying as raw data is actually raw data. First of all, I need to know that it hasn't been run through an SMP algorithm, and the algorithm has picked out arrays that it thinks are important to this kind of analysis, which it almost inevitably has done. It's almost inevitably going to have selected, we've selected 500,000, blah, blah, blah. That to me is where you already have the problem, because before you did that selection, what did it look like? What did the genome look like? What did you reject and say was useless that was actually very informative on the African side? So I just want to be really transparent and say, I'm kind of handing over to you now. I'm not co-signing at this point, because my perspective is, I think we got to go back. So that's what I just want to be transparent. I just want you to be like, so you know where I stand on this. No,
I got you 100%. And I could respect that position even as an engineer, like applying a correction factor with respect to missing SMP arrays wouldn't be difficult, even with this analysis. This is just one version, and it's open to interpretation and change. I just wanted to show you, specifically, if you look at, you can see a little bit closer here, you have Bolito Bay, in Southern Africa here, the Shumlaka foragers in West Africa here, and you'll see Nuerat would be right there with dynastic Egypt, Tafarat right there, ancient Paleolithic North Africa. There's the Green Sahara right there. And then you have the Neolithic and Paleolithic Great Lakes region right here. Modaman right there. So like literally, if you include African sources, Nuerat is right in the middle of Paleolithic, North Africa in the Great Lakes region right there. Amazing. So you could see why they didn't want to do this.
Because every time it just makes, it gives you a different perspective on, and just to be clear, actually do me a favor. And I know this is going to be kind of going back a bit, but I don't want to assume that people know what they're looking at. So can you just explain how principal component analysis works?
So
in terms of principal component 1 and 2, and what this chart is actually telling us.
Yeah, so
actually, before we do, a quick shout out to Seti, because he's giving Seti Townsend said our great scholars will be proud of your work, and I appreciate you. Thank you very much. We're just doing what we can at the moment, so it's much appreciated. And a big shout out to Christian Noyes. Christian Nyhughes he just sent a €5 donation, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Sorry, over to you, Kanji.
Yeah. So principal component analysis, again, most genetic studies use this. It is not a perfect tool. It's a dimensionality reduction tool. So it basically helps you simplify genetic data with respect to axes. And the axes are up to, and this is called a supervised analysis, in the sense that we, as the inputters of the data, can specify the axes. So I always bring up the point that, PCA is invalid if you don't have the right sample size. And if you don't specify the right axes, you could pretty much use it to say whatever you want. I could take your data and show that you're a mixture in the middle of Japanese and Chinese people if I only have East Asian data, right? Or you may be skewed a little bit outside of that, but what does that really tell you, right? So Elhan, I think his name is Elhan El-Haik or El-Haik. He is a geneticist who went viral kind of showing the flaws of PCA, and he is of Jewish ancestry. And his claim to fame is showing how the modern Ashkenazi Jews actually aren't descended from the ancient Israelis, which got him in a lot of trouble from his analysis.
No shit, Sherlock.
But that's controversial because
of course
they're disproportionately represented within the field of genetics. So he was kind of a bad, one with respect to their community. But just in general, again, it's a dimensionality reduction tool, and we get to specify the axes as well as the data set that we're using. That's a kind of a simple way of showing what PCA is, right? So with this, I specified the y-axis to be East African versus West and Central African, and then the x-axis to be Supra-Saharan versus Infra-Saharan, or North Africa, so-called Maghreb, versus everything below the Sahara as the x-axis. And then I got all of the ancient DNA on the African continent, right? Because I wanted to compare Nuerat, which is dynastic Egypt, to the Kadruka sample in Kerma, 4,000 years ago, Sudan, to early Nile, Takakori, Green Sahara, Tafarat, obviously, Modaman in Ethiopia, and then these Great Lakes region, populations over here, which they have ancient DNA for. And then you have the Shumlaka in Cameroon and Bolido Bay, which is a little bit outside of the mark in terms of the clustering. But you can see again, Nuerat right here.
Just give us a heads up about the location of Shumlaka. Where was that taken?
Yeah, so Shumlaka is actually in Western Cameroon. It's a cave shelter that has been populated, for 30,000 years. The samples that they got are 8,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago. And what makes Shumlaka important is it actually validates the Ethiopian migration model in showing that modern so-called Bantu populations are not related to the Shumlaka foragers 3,000 years ago. Meaning that 3,000 years ago, Cameroon was distinct genetically from the modern, Bantu populations.
Well, that's that's really important. And I don't know if we're going to agree here, by the way, because me and you have gone back and forth about Bantu, but that proves what I've always, a lot of what most people who descend from Bantu populations will, and that's that Cameroon is not the origin point of the Bantu people. Okay. They claim that the migration started from Cameroon, don't they? They claim it started from somewhere southern Nigeria, Cameroon. You said genetically that's not supported. That alleged migration, or at least that group of people, trace their origin back to the Nile Valley / Great Lakes region. Would be a more probable thing.
And there's scholars who have dealt with this. I take it from a linguistic approach, in the sense that, Bantu as a working hypothesis isn't really confirmed. So if you want to say that all of these populations come from the Nigeria, Cameroon, Urhamat, or homeland, you don't really have linguistic evidence for that. Genetically, there's no evidence for that. Archaeologically, there's no evidence for that. And most scholars on the continent, like Chami, Lunigo, Bilolo, etc., they opt for a more multi-dimensional, multi-regional, migration, not specifying it from a specific point, but saying that, it was interacting throughout the African continent. Whereas the Nile Valley, in my opinion, is the most likely origin point. It was probably a mixture of different movements across the continent that we haven't really been able to specify, which kind of gets into the problem of Bantu as a category, because there's not really specific diagnostic, archaeological, linguistic, and genetic evidence to specify it. It's just kind of a hodgepodge. And with this Greenbergian migration stuff, that kind of confounds it, because people think Cameroon, Nigeria is our homeland, and then we spread iron and farming and pottery into Central and Southern Africa. But there's no evidence that doesn't really show.
At this point, I think that entire hypothesis is one that's really just been popularized by Eurocentrists, particularly the white Southern Africans who have pushed that narrative. I don't think that's one that we've ever supported on the continent. It's not one that we've ever claimed to be true. It's just one they pushed to kind of like push their white South Africans arrived first, or at the same time the blacks did, so we know how they roll with their pseudo history.
And I'll say this, I'll say this, like Obenga, he kind of started the comparison with Mbochi in Congo Brazzaville of African languages with ancient Egyptian or Merimikimi after Diop. There are more African linguists and scholars who have connected so-called Bantu languages with ancient Kemet than any other, African group, which is pretty interesting.
Because it's easy to do, by the way. And that's coming from not even from a linguist. It's very easy to do. So you realize that's when you realize there must be something to this, because making those connections is something that is not difficult to do whatsoever. Most of the words have preserved. It probably just takes a few good scholars really taking a concerted effort to, really build up the what would you call it? You're the linguist guy, the lexicon and the lexical links, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would even say, like, ironically, many of these scholars are actually from Cameroon, right? So like it kind of like puts a monkey wrench in the Eurocentric, agenda with respect to that of separating these African populations. But just in general, I think that we should take a look, like Bololo and Kuka and Gome, all of these scholars who have done the work, Umdigi, who, rest in peace to his wife who just recently passed away. But these are legendary African scholars, from the so-called Bantu region who have done the work. And we should take, their work into consideration when we're having these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move back now to the subject at hand, which is this. I'm going to hand back over to you. Let's carry on cooking this paper.
Yeah. So third intermediate period, Abasir Malek, that was what they used to compare Nuerat to. The so-called Eurasians in the Abasir study. Dr. Keita, he critiqued this data set. The population represented West Asian foreigners, not local groups. So the peer review caught them on that, and here you can see up here the Morocco Neolithic here and the Levant. I think that's the Levant Bronze Age in the Nuerat, or in the third intermediate period. That's what this chart is right here. So that was another flaw, that they made in the study.
Yeah, but who's the subject? This is a QPADM, but who's the subject? I don't think it's Nuerat in this one, is it?
Oh, this is the Abasir. This is the Abasir population.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah.
Abasir
okay.
Malek. So yeah,
did they say which one, or did they just?
I'd have to look into that.
None of them have names. That's the great thing about all of these studies that they do, is that they never find individuals with names, and this is one of my big criticisms. Okay, notice they seem to avoid, like the plague, actual nobles with names buried in tombs, kings, priests, people who are actually. There's no debate about this person, their ethnicity, because there's even been discussions and debates over the whether or not Nuerat man was, it could have been a foreigner. The argument has been raised and supported quite well that the entire region of the Nuerat could have been subject to basically a foreign group. And we haven't gone there, because I've just argued on the basis that, look, okay, foreign or not, the dude's black. And we've just looked at his dear genetics and we were like, yeah, well, this is how they fudge this and that. But even on that level, there's still, it's like on every aspect of analysis, they're trying to push in their favor as much as possible. They know if they go here, we're most likely to get foreigners, and then if we compare them to this and exclude these people, we're most likely to get these outcomes. And if we do, it's like they're not missing any opportunity to declare something to be ancient Egyptian, native indigenous, ancient Egyptian, but they've almost gone through every effort to make sure it's not an ancient Egyptian. Am I the only person seeing that? I feel like that's what's taking place.
They have, and they're trying to stack the deck, and even with their flawed methodology, you can see that the Third Intermediate Period and modern Egyptians are not the same as Nuerat, because their analysis shows an increase of Moda-related ancestry and infra-Saharan African-related ancestry. So, like, their lies are multi-dimensional. Their propaganda is multi-dimensional. It's just like, wow. And then going back to QPADM, like as you said, they flagged QPADM limits with admic sources, right? So they said, hey, this is not a Mesopotamian Neolithic. Go back and change it. You know, they went back to the drawing board and they came up with a two-source model to force Levantine affinities, disregarding deep ancestral North African content.
Two-source model.
Yeah.
Do you understand how ridiculous that is? So now, guys, now that you know how QPADM works, I hope you understand how ridiculous putting a two-source model into QPADM is. I hope you realize that, because now you know how it works. You know what essentially that means. But sorry, carry on.
And the two sources weren't African, so it's just, you know, it's just, and technically speaking, Middle Neolithic Morocco is, but like that's the Natufian conversation. That's like deep Natufian stuff, and it's just like, you know,
I feel like we should be doing this. So here's my idea, guys. I think what we need to do, make it easier, okay? Because you guys know I'm into the Moors and all of that stuff, and you know I'm into Black presence in Europe. You know, I'm into Black nobility, whatever. I don't know if some people are gonna, but here, listen, hear me out. So here's my idea. We need to get the genetics of all of these ancient rulers, all of them. I don't care, including Queen Elizabeth II, who just died. We want her DNA as well. And I'm gonna run it through a two-source QPADM mix between Nigerian Yoruba, and Rwandan. We're gonna run that two-source, and then we're gonna prove the true ethnicity of Queen Elizabeth II. That's what I feel like we need to just run with this. If they're gonna do it,
support that.
Let's just run with it, man. Let's just run with it, and let's just turn everybody black. Yeah, let's just do that.
I support it. Like, let's blackwash as much as they whitewash, because I mean, if people really see how ridiculous his methodology is, then they're going to put it in the right category, you know. So we went over F stats.
Let's do it. I mean, this is how they're doing it. Now we know the method. They played themselves. Now we know how they're doing it. We just need to get them back. It's all about revenge at this point.
Oh yeah, really, it is. Yeah, and anybody again, like, you know, even with respect to, you know, King's hesitation, if you get the raw data, I'm going to share it within the Discord. I'm going to share the link to everybody who's in, you know, the King's Monologue Discord, as well as my server. If you get the data, you could literally run this yourself. Like, you could do it yourself, and you could see how flawed and propagandistic this stuff is, right? So again, F stats, they're highly sensitive to which populations are used as outgroups, right? If you use inconsistent or narrow outgroup sets like Modaman as an outgroup, that's going to distort the ancestry inference, right? So if you exclude African reference population in the source panels and the outgroup, it's going to bias the result towards Eurasians, like point blank period. So that's exactly what they did. It's flawed. We should all get to realize that. And then again, this is going back to what I mentioned before. Initially, the coverage was 0.22x, which is low coverage. That's a really, really low coverage data, right? So they extended the coverage using the Asudis trait. I don't know if I have that here. Yeah. So they extended the coverage using the Asudis traits, and that was the dental morphology traits. But they didn't have the majority. They didn't have the majority of the traits. So, like, how can you? And that's the thing about the coverage amplification. You don't have the majority of the traits. You have an absence of the traits, but you're using that teeth specimen to expand coverage. But again, with respect to the coverage amplification, sum up.
No, I didn't even what you're just saying. I didn't realize they did that. This is like every time I think they. So wait, just to be clear, yeah. So their coverage, was obviously too low, 0.22, yeah. And in order to amplify that, they've compared with the dental traits, which were obviously Eurocentric leaning. We've already expressed the fact that they made sure that the database was full of stuff that Africans that were very distant, so they had an excuse to use Eurasians. As their, and then they used those Eurasian groups who were closest dentally to amplify.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
They ran those teeth extracts into an amplification program, right? And within that process, they didn't even do the standard methodology for coverage amplification. They didn't have any PCR duplicate rates, no complexity curves, no coverage plots, no damage, which you had less than half. So you definitely should report damage. You definitely should report contamination estimates, and then no details on the merging shotgun and capture data. You need this stuff for amplification, and they didn't do it at all, right? So they just ran with that, and they got biased frequencies from the DNA amplification and biased fine scale inferences. So to me, like, this is like the worst part of the study is the coverage amplification, because it's rooted in the actual analysis of the genome itself. That's crazy. From that, we honestly can't trust it.
From that alone, this is now we're the realms of pseudosity. I'm making up a new word for this, by the way. The realms of pseudosity that they've just stepped into now are insane. This is mad. This is crazy.
Yeah,
that is wild. I did not see this part. I missed this. I'm putting my hand up here. I missed this. I wasn't aware of them doing this to amplify the DNA. I did not know that they relied on the dental traits to then decide which groups they're going to use to amplify the DNA. So they're basically just turning an African into, well, even the people that they could have amplified him with could also be black. But that's not even the point. The point, or the fact of the matter is, regardless of that, it's the genetics that they've already declared to belong to certain groups, which they know are now going to be amplified as a result of what they've done. That's crazy. Yeah, that's really crazy. Man.
Just to top it off, these are the last two I have for this. Like, again, going back to the basics: dark to black skin, dolichocephalic skulls, tropical body proportions. He's black. I mean, like, he's black. Come on, like, there's just no way to get around it. And again, shout out to King for his reconstruction. This reconstruction that they did was terrible, awful. I'm going to replace a lot of this stuff with your new reconstruction that I respect a lot more. So you just have to, we don't even have to get into the deep, even though it's really nasty what they did. Just the basics show that he was a black African population. So he was a black African person. So we should not ever fall for their propaganda, ever.
It's just I'm sticking with that word pseudosity. I was going to say the temerity, but it's just the pseudosity that they can take this is where I get really kind of like, I do get upset doing what I do. I know I kind of like show it and we kind of laugh through it and we just want to expose it and we keep it at an academic level. And I think that's very important. But sometimes this can be very upsetting because on a basic level, this is a black man's skeleton that's in front of us. It's got Black African limb proportions, a almost indisputable Black African head shape. And they've done everything they can to manipulate this individual and turn him into something that he's not. And then they have the nerve to kind of like fire accusations back at us and be like, haha, you know, why are you guys getting so upset? Stop blackwashing. It's kind of like, you can't even, I don't care who you are, come debate me now and convince me that this is not a Black African skull and not a Black African skeleton. You can't do it. You will not be able to. You don't have anything that's weighting this outside of being a native Black African. Nothing. Even the DNA, the parts that actually inform you about phenotype, are telling you quite clearly what this person is.
Yeah.
It's just wild, man. It's just wild how they gaslight, you know, how they gaslight the Black community is just insane, you know. It's really insane. Let me give a quick shout out to Afrospora Films. Thank you very much, brother. He said the absence or presence of Neanderthal DNA in royal mummies should be the beginning and end of discussion on the Africanity of the ancient Egyptians. Keep up the absolutely. And the worst thing is we have many of these things that could put up, and that's why they don't ever want to debate on that level. You know, we have the Neanderthal ancestry. We have the high-risk plex model, which will give you skin tone. We have melanin density tests, yeah, which have been performed already, which will tell you what skin tone someone is. We have anthropometric proportions, which will tell you where someone's ancestors evolved in terms of their limb proportions. Yeah, we have cranial traits. We have all of these things. Yeah. This stopped being a debate. It stopped being an argument a very long time ago, and yet here we are. Here we still are in the same place, debating these same people and these same talking points, because they're now trying to basically fudge a area or an industry that they have almost complete domination in and is weighted very heavily in their favor. And to me, it's almost like the last guard that they've got. I think they've been overwhelmed and completely I think they've been overwhelmed by how strong our argument is, personally, over the last few years in terms of proliferating that argument. It's not that we invented something new. The greats did it. Diop did it a long time ago. But in terms of presenting all of the great scholars who come before us, presenting their arguments, I think they've been overwhelmed by it. And very much this is their last stronghold, their last fort, the hope is in these genetics and fudging this genetic data to support their false narrative, you know. And it's complete and it's craziness, man.
Yeah.
But anyway, carry on.
It is. I got another slideshow just to go over just some of the genetic data that we could use, you know, from Gordine et al. This goes over some of the things I mentioned before. You know, the tuberculosis in the Middle Kingdom of Kemet had a Senegambian related strain in L5L6, right? And this is from Jean-Philippe Gordine et al. Then you look at the Abasir study, the Schunemann et al. Study that they referenced. When you look at leprosy within Abasir Malek, you have the 3L genotype related to the S15 found in Martinique. And then 3L leprosy is found in West Africa and among Black Brazilians, right? So that's showing a real connection there in the late period, you know, that they tried to connect to back migrations. It kind of got trapped there. Obviously, sickle cell anemia, you know, from the Green Sahara, you have 73,000 years ago from infra-Saharan Africa to the Delta, and you can see the HPS allele frequency. You know, these Eurocentrics will never talk about the diseases of the ancient Kemites and how they connect to inner Africa. Obvious here, right? Then you have a study from El Kamel and Aruna et al. And by the way, they didn't mention any of these studies that I'm about to mention in this. They didn't even reference them, which is wild. Like, that's nasty. Like, that is crazy to me how you don't mention any of these studies. But they show El Kamel and Aruna et al. Both. These are two separate studies, actually. There was a massive Arabization process in North Africa where a massive influx of Arabic genes entered the region during the 7th century spread of Islam. So they know that this happened. Geneticists are fully aware that this happened. Right?
And they ignore it.
They ignore it.
Wild thing. They always ignore Eurasian. I'm very careful about calling Arabs Eurasian, by the way, because. But anyway, but they always ignore outside introgressions into North Africa as an explanation for the current phenotype.
Yeah,
they never want to have that discussion. This is across the board. I did my entire kind of like series on slavery, and I exposed obviously the Black Sea slave trade, the Barbary Corsairs, all of these relatively recent, but long-lasting slave trades from Europe into North Africa that were certainly more in number and more impactful on the population, far more than any alleged trans-Saharan slave trade. Okay. Now they totally ignore these. They never reference them. They're never mentioned by anyone as an explanation as to why North Africans look the way they look. They never. To me, it's very, very clear. North Africa was black, remained black for most of its history, and then a whole bunch of slaves were moved in over a period of at least 3,000 years. But over a long period of time, slaves have been moved in from the Black Sea region into North Africa and have affected the demographics of the area, and that's of the changeover in terms of the personnel is actually very recent, as in the last 200 to 300 years, as a result of the Barbary Corsairs and the European introgression. Those actually had a massive switchover effect, because that's when there was a power shift, and actually the people who were foreigners or who were imports became the ones who were empowered, and that had a massive shifting effect, just like what we're seeing in modern day Libya and Algeria, where you have these racial genocides taking place, Western Sahara, etc., etc. No, so they know how North Africa became how it is today, and trying to apply this presentist view and back apply it several thousands of years. North Africans are a black population to me, and when you're talking about Green Sahara, so I'm not even going to have this discussion with you about anyone but jiggity jet blacks being present. Let's be really honest about this. But anyway, yeah. So
yeah, me and you, I remember we had this discussion, like just dealing with the fact of the so-called Berber or Amazigh populations. Just by reading of Obanga's analysis, he sees them, not related to Niger Egyptians or Paleo-Africans. In his, distinct surgical analysis of Afro-Asiatic flaws, he puts Amazigh as a separate African population on the continent. Like a lot of people try to say that, he was racist or like colorist with respect to his exclusion, but he just didn't find, morphological and phonological commonalities between Berber and the Pharaonic language. But with that said, if you look at their genetics, EM81 is observed at 90% among the Imohag or Amazigh of the Sahel Libyan region. H1 frequencies, which is a so-called back migration frequency, is in the Faison among the Amazigh and the Imohag at 61%. And even the Beja people, they're closely related to the Imohag. And especially when you get into the Siwa Oasis of ancient Egypt, these are Berber populations speaking. They look black just like anybody else. They're actually closely linked, mitochondrially to inter-African populations. But it's just showing, like, when you look at the highest frequencies of these so-called North African genes, right, in Africa, they're black people. Even today, like, they're black people. So people trying to say that, North Africans weren't black or whatever, and like they're trying to use these different genetic inferences, we have them. Like, we literally.
I mean, they're definitely black. There's just no room for debate. I've had been privileged, I should say, to have very long discussions with Professor Dana Marniche about this subject. Yeah, and she's very well schooled. She'll take you through back to the original Berber people, the Berry tribe. She'll take you through everything and these people, how they evolved, and how they eventually were, came to gradually be replaced by modern people who classify themselves as Berbers, but we should call them the Berbers, the modern Berber speaking tribes, but not the originators of the culture or the people who have inherited it. Once again, I would say a majority of that ancestry comes from the import of slaves from the Black Sea and from Europe over a long period of time. And that's traceable, that's historic. There are several books on it. I could pull up 4 books I've got in my office right now and start reading from them. So this introgression of slaves from Europe has a very tangible, in fact, it has a far more thorough written history than the alleged trans-Saharan slave trade. Far more linguistic and contemporaneous evidence of this slave trade from Europe into North Africa.
Yeah, you're the first one who mentioned that, and I never even thought about that, but it makes sense. That actually makes sense, because I always thought it was like, back migration, Levantine sailors who came into North Africa, during the Neolithic period. But the slave trade actually makes more sense.
Well, it was constant, and it was agreed, and it was something that was customary. It was a customary operation. People knew what time it was. It was a very much, people were almost being raised to enter that portion of the world. I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not making justifications about things being right or wrong. I'm not going to go into a whole moral or moralistic argument about the rights and wrongs of slavery. I know it's wrong, but ultimately we're talking history here. We're talking anthropology here. And this is a part of history that largely gets ignored, but vastly explains the current demographic makeup of much of North and Northeast Africa.
No, most definitely. And according to Dr. Hassan, when he looks at the presence of Eurasian, Y DNA, such as F, G, I, J, and K in Northeast Africa, he attributes this to recent migrations from West Asia into Europe, and they're unrelated. Even guys like, grifters, like, Thief X, you try to use these certain haplotypes to say that,
I can't believe that guy has an audience, man. I'm just so surprised.
It's just racist, these racist sandbores, really.
He's like a Jesse Lee Peterson, isn't he? They're just like, use me for anything as long as you follow me.
Facts.
As long as you follow me, I'll say anything you like.
literally. It's just a step and fetch it. That's what we call them, tap dancers. Right. But again, the experts like Dr. Hassan Attal, they say that these haplotypes are not related to the founders of the dynastic period whatsoever. And this is
interesting, just going back as well, or just on the you talked about the Arab kind of like introgression into North Africa and how it's supported genetically. I would even say the Arab groups, because a lot of people will be like, oh well, the Arabs, that's it, that's the answer. I actually believe those Arabs who entered Africa at that period of time were also black. And this is obviously, I know people go, but that's I think I think there's a lot to support the fact that those Arabs are black. I think the shift in demographics, a lot of that was due to widespread intensification of the imports of slaves, like I said. So even like Egypt was one of the biggest importers of Mamluks. And they imported them. There's several texts you can get that will support the fact that they imported them en masse. They liked Mamluk slaves a lot for some reason. And Mamluks actually came to rule in Egypt. So you had several Mamluk dynasties, and then the Mamluk dynasties continued the Mamluk slave trade. So even the Mamluk rulers were still importing Mamluks en masse as to be slaves in Egypt. So that shift that you see mostly around the Delta region of Egypt, that shift came as a result more of the more recent kind of Mamluk slavery that took place more like from the 12th century onwards. So it's just interesting how that happened.
I agree with I did a video about Islam and the Umayyad dynasty, and just the fact that some of the classical Arabic texts do describe themselves as dark, right? And they use abiyad, which means white, but not white in the same way that we define it, but like white is like the reflection or luminosity of the skin, right? And then red is the word that they use for the so-called white people that we see today in certain contexts. So like I would say but that's a super deep conversation, just getting into like how Arabs changed over time. That would take us like a whole live to really get into that, right?
It kind of goes back to the discussion that I just want to. I did want to raise a point when you were talking about these North African populations, and that does kind of support because what you find, or at least from discussions that I've had, I'm not as well read in this subject as I am in some of the other stuff we've been talking about, but there does seem to be a trait amongst many of the ancient North African populations of quite strong endogamy amongst them. They're quite strongly endogamous populations. And as a result of that, they've preserved their culture really strong. So people like the Fulani, who are much further north, you can see Fulani culture across the Saharan caves paintings. You can see that's definitely Fulani culture that you're seeing there. You see Fulani hairstyle, etc. So this is a culture that have managed to preserve their cultural traits. We're talking 8 millennia. It's a very long period of time, and you're only going to do that with a degree of strong endogamy. So I do actually believe there's a lot to be learned from Fulani genetics and other groups as well. But that's one that just basically comes to mind quite strongly, and could have been the reason why you have that slight differentiation in that region.
No, most definitely, I agree with that. Shout out to the Fulanis out there. I know they get a bad rap in Nigeria and other states.
Don't worry about Nigeria, man. Nigeria's got more politics than sense, man. I don't even worry about all that. My best friends are Igbo.
Oh yeah, I already know.
My best friends are all Igbo, man. I'm a Yoruba man. All my best friends are Igbo. I'm like an honorary Igbo when I go to Abuja.
So this same scholar, he found the BM60, haplotype in the Copts of Sudan, right? And this is typically related to so-called South Sudanese populations. The Bamileke in Cameroon have this. The Mossi people of Burkina Faso have this as well. So according to the scholar, he's saying, these Copts with BM60, they're related to infra-Saharan Africans who migrated and who originated in the Middle Happy River Valley, South Sudan area, and then they migrated north and they founded dynastic Kemet, right? So this is clear genetic evidence, not cited within the article. Haplotype K in the Armana mummies, this relates to the fact that you have some small, incorporations of Levantine agricultural items into an African mode of production, right?
Yeah.
So you may have a few people here and there from Eurasia who came in, who married in, and then their children's children have K. But if you look at the Afar, the Garaji, the Zanata, Amazigh, the Sahrawi populations, the Oromo, there are African populations that have K. So Thief X and his agenda to separate Kemet from Africa is flawed with this.
But also there has to be, once again, there's this ahistorical application that's happening there. Like, we don't know what mitochondrial DNA implies. We know it, in terms of a nation like Egypt, which was a cultural high culture, so to speak, or local high culture, the importation of, I wouldn't say importation, but things like political marriages, we know that mitochondrial DNA follows the woman. Okay, so if you're a noble or ruler, or even someone who's rich, it would have been taken as quite a statement to have concubines, to have, your wife, and then have others, so mitochondrial DNA it's got to be very varied in any high culture. Okay, if we're talking about small ethnicities, small tribes, who are very kind of endogamous, then mitochondrial DNA is far more informative. But if you're talking about a high culture like Egypt, you're just going to get random mitochondrial DNA popping up everywhere, depending on where people were taking wives from at any given moment in time. So I think the overestimation or the over exaggeration of the importance of mitochondrial DNA, which is something that for some reason they love to test. Even sometimes when they could test both, they just give you the mitochondria and don't give you the Y. I think there's a very obvious reason as to why they do that. Let me give a quick shout out as well, because I did get a donation from Jama at Green. Thank you very much brother. He says, excellent tag team on the research. For truth, Ma'at's sake, Diop's DNA studies were used to validate Black African Kemet seeded global civilization. DNA drives regenerative culture, which is why this is so important. Thank you very much for your donation. Yeah, appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and that was the point that I was making with that, with respect to that, like as you just brilliantly laid out, is that obviously you're gonna have some mtDNA, you know, from the Levant come in, but if you look at the genome-wide analysis, it shows infra-Saharan African affinities, especially the pop affiliator analysis. And Dr. Arrett and Shamar Kakeda said, again, Levantine agricultural items, maybe some Levantine concubines, were incorporated into an indigenous African strategy. So, you know, the appearance of K and even H1, which would actually kind of be like a more Paleolithic type of migration, that actually shows that these are African populations. This speaks to the diversity of Africa. Like if you look at H1 is super deep in Saharan Africa, right? And the Sahel as well. So Thief X, when he's like, oh, Queen T was K, and you know, he tries to jump out on this, like, no, that doesn't deny the fact that they were Africans at all.
Absolutely.
So this is just getting into just some of the connections, you know, within West African genome, you have Sudanic ancestry that reflects a migration across the Sahel 2,000 years ago, you know, supporting the Diopian model. You know, Diop actually positioned the Yoruba people coming from that same region area, you know, in the northern part of the Great Lakes zone of the Happy River Basin. So Dr. Busby et al.'s research on this proves this definitively. And then we mentioned this
pause again. Sorry, I just want to give a quick shout out to Shangamaya, who said during the Middle Kingdom, 70% of women in Lower Kemet were brought from Asia, source who were the Hyksos challenging traditional narratives. That's a lot. Is that maybe, so that's the intermediate period you're talking about. So that would be during the second intermediate period, or actually during the Middle Kingdom itself. I'd be interested to know. But thank you very much for your £5 donation. It's very much greatly appreciated. I can definitely see that jump happening during the intermediate period. That would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
And we went over this.
I know the Middle Kingdom liked their women from the south. If we're going to take Mental as an example, you know, they like
I think it's more of the 18th,
like they're women from the south, Middle Kingdom rulers. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think it's more 18th dynasty that they were getting, you know, some of the foreign women. But either way, like, to get the crown, you had to have like a black maternal ancestry to even sit on the throne, right? So that was a thing. And this is another mitochondrial example. Like you see LOF in Adima populations, right? And within the Adima period, you have the canine mesial ridge, right? So like you have a South African dental morphology within, you know, the pre-dynastic context, in the dynastic context. And then you have LOF, you know, which is associated with Southern African populations. So like you can literally see the fact that there's deep inner African affinities if you really want to do the work. And again, this is another example. They don't mention, none of these DNAs on the mummies that are coming out mention any of these studies that I'm bringing up right now. They just completely ignore them.
Well, it doesn't surprise me that when we're talking about, you know, pre-dynastic moving through the Nakada up to early dynastic, that we have those Southern African traits, because one of the oldest reconstruction I've done, Nama, looks like a Quene slash Xhosa man. You know, he looks like right on the border, you know, right between Quene and Xhosa. He's right there. So, you know, that's to me, that's a nod. You know, I don't think that's accidental. I think that's a nod. This guy, there's something about this guy's face that just takes me right to that region. And then you're saying we have the genetics to support it, you know.
And the dental morphology, right? All of the above, right? So that's another thing. N1A, we obviously went over into the fact that, in Kenya, like they have some of the highest affinities of I, which is a child of N1A. So like when you look at the Bab el Mandab Strait, you can see N1A distribution across Eastern Africa. So again, them trying to use that to say that, Nuerat was a Eurasian and not African is completely invalid, because they always want these haplogroups to be Eurasian, back migrating into Africa, as opposed to coming from Africa in its basal state and then migrating out into Eurasia. Right.
Exactly. So, I just want to give a quick 5-minute warning. Sorry to cut you off. Because I don't want this live stream to go on for too long. Because I'm doing them back to back. But hey, I think the guys might vote to get you back on the channel again, because this has been pretty epic so far. So it's like a 5-minute warning, guys.
Yeah.
If you want to get some questions in for Kamji whilst he's here, or say something cool, now's the time to start doing it, because we are going to wrap up this live stream in about 5 minutes time.
Yeah, let's get it.
But, carry on, Kamji. So to cut you off, brother.
Okay, for sure. I think I have like a few more of this. Like again, this is LOA1. LOA1, you can clearly see specifically LOA1 B1A3 went from the Nile Valley into, what is now Cameroon, right? So you can see that, spread right there. L2A2, same way. It went from Sudan, ancient Sudan, into modern Congo. So when you see the Shaluba people, the Lunda people, the Kuba people, the Bakongo people who have this mitochondrial ancestry speak about pharaonic origins, you could look at L2A2 and its distribution to support that in the African continent. M1 is another example. M1A is Northeast African, and you can find that in the Bassa people of Cameroon. You can find that in the Balansa people of Guinea-Bissau. And according to Dr. Alexandra Rosa, this spread into West Africa came from the migration of Kushites 2,000 years ago. That's how you have M1A in West African populations, and you can see its distribution there, on the chart to the right. And then this is just getting into just some R. People try to use R to say that they're Eurasian, but the R in ancient Egypt came from Chad. It came from, RV88 in Chad. So that's clear, particularly.
Well, actually, I read an article that gives its origin point to Equatorial Guinea. Interestingly enough.
Oh yeah. There's quite a variety of positions there. So 1589 is the branch that you see within Kemet on this chart to the top right. So then you see 69 is the R that they have, and this is a Chadian. This came from Chad. Despite people may say that, it was a back migration, maybe in the Paleolithic times, but what they have was already developed in Africa, in Chad. These were Black African populations who migrated to the Northeast. Like, that's pretty clear,
Well, here it is. So going back to the R and the back migration argument. So I believe it's the Gonzalez paper 2015 that he argues that its origin point is Equatorial Guinea. And his argument is that the people who carry it in Equatorial Guinea don't have any corresponding markers to suggest any Eurasian integration at any point in time. So he argues that quite strongly. He says that there's no evidence here. The only thing that I suggest could have happened is that it was carried out through the Chad Basin into North Africa. He said that's the route that it took. It originated here, carried through the Chad Basin. Here's what's really interesting. I think you've got to want to jump on this, because then that brings into question the whole phylogeny.
Yeah, it
has been argued here. It does. It brings it all into question. And this is what I'm talking about deconstructing these from the base, because if that has been placed incorrectly, which is what I believe is the case, within a table of phylogeny, which is totally plausible, by the way, we're just accepting these, these tables that they've created based on their Eurocentric output. It changes entirely the way that we interpret how that particular clade is being looked at.
No, it does. And I found, my family being Bamileke, like I found P in Western Cameroon, which makes no sense to me. But if they did this wrong, then it's like, P, R, and whatever comes from that lineage has to be African origin. Because how do you get P in West Africa? Like, how is that possible. It shouldn't be. But again, we got to revisit this stuff. We got to revisit all this stuff, to be honest, because they're definitely lying about this. This is just some mixture.
I think they're definitely lying. I think they are more than lying. They're supporting the narrative. Sorry, Karen.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. They're pushing a framework, right? They're pushing a framework, and this is something that I got from the Diop conference, where they showed, people try to pigeonhole these Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, West and Eastern Africa, sedentary versus nomad. But you actually see sharing, of these different populations on the continent, genomes. They're mixing interregionally from the ancient pre-dynastic period and then intensifying during the Islamic period in Arabic immigration. So you can see the mixture of these different groups across the Sahelo-Savannah belts for trade, for commerce. Africans have been mixing, for millennia, really. It shouldn't really be complicated, an ancient, like, even if these categories are real, a Niger-Congo isn't going to look at an Afro-Asiatic booty and say no. Like, it's just not going to happen. Right. So
this is just it. When they try and create these splits, these kind of like, East and West Africa split 75,000 years ago. I'm like, are you? Yeah. As an African, you really do get offended and irritated when you see the kind of crap that they come out with, as though every single African ethnicity has just sat in its pocket and not moved for 100,000 years. Like, it's just so flipping insulting. And this is exactly how they build up their entire understanding of anthropology on the African continent. It's so annoying, man.
It is. It just doesn't make logical, because like I live in the Bay Area, right? And there's Ethiopians, Nigerians, African Americans, Jamaicans, and they mix. They all mix. Like, they're not saying you're East African. No, you're attractive. She fine, right? Like, she got a nice body. Like, he's handsome, XYZ. And it would be foolish for us to think that our ancestors didn't think the same way. Like, it's just dumb.
Yeah, man. All right. I'm going to, at that point.
Yeah.
Let's
wrap it up.
Yeah. Let's put a pause there, because, by the way, this has been a really excellent stream, man. Wesker in the chat, I think you know him as Orion Blue. He's been asking me to get you on the channel since forever. So it's good to have you on. I actually feel like I reached out to you at least about a year ago, and you just blanked me. So it's at least now you got back to me this time around. But we'll let go of that. It's the past, and we're not going to bring that up.
I don't even remember it, to be honest.
You just blank me, but yeah. Anyway, you're here now, so you are very welcome, guys. If you haven't already done, make sure that you subscribe, or at least check out Camg's channel. I advise you to subscribe, because the content is every bit as good as this live stream. If you've enjoyed it today, really excellent stuff. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on what matters. That's the main thing. And I think we're about the same thing, Kamji. I lie?
Yeah, no, most definitely. Like, we're out here to spread the truth, just to Black people, to African people, to fight against the anti-Black propaganda, and just to respect the legacy of our ancestors and scholars. Like, that's really the point of this.
Absolutely. So, guys, that's going to be kind of our curtain call. Let me just ask you to hit the likes up. I've only got 235 likes, and I'm sure there's been at least 1,000 people who've passed through in the last couple of hours that we've been live. So please hit up the like button. Please leave a nice, kind comment for our guests. Say thank you to Kamjiverse. I'm saying thank you to you, Kamjiverse. You've been absolutely amazing, and I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation, and also enjoyed being able to sit back while someone else drives. So that's been cool.
Yeah, this was fun. We got to do this, more often, especially, when the racists attack. We have to be more, collaborative, with our focus, because, united we are stronger. We are definitely stronger, and we're definitely going to be able to, put the truth out there the way that it needs to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, you didn't disappoint, man. Thank you very much, guys. I think I'm gonna wrap it up at that point. So thank you for coming, everyone. Thank you for being the amazing community. Before you disappear, don't go anywhere because I've got a few shout outs. Let me give another quick shout out to Changamaya, J Matt Green, Macy, Afrospora Films, Christian, Nye Hughes, Tarsetti Townsend, Kadir, Gentile, Deshawn, Macy, Surfactant, A Hebrew in Business, Passport and Profits. Thank you very much, guys. You have been an amazing audience today. Thank you very much for your generous donations, and thank you for just keeping the chat live and popping and making us feel like we weren't talking to ourselves. I'm probably gonna be live tomorrow, so I'll see you then. In the meantime, me and Kamji are gonna stay on for a little chat and see where I can get him back on the channel. But thank you for joining us. Kamji, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Jeffrey Guyot, who, subscribed to my channel recently. Anybody, if you want to see more of this content, more of the deep dives, I've been doing it more frequently. So, subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more coming up just with respect to just understanding the genetic atlas of Africa and just how to really, get to the bottom of a lot of this propaganda. So I appreciate all the love and support. And I look forward to coming back to the King's Monologue again. So appreciate you, King, for having me on. And thanks for everybody in the chat.
Been my pleasure, brother. Okay, guys, take care. Have a fantastic evening. And I'll see you very soon. Peace.